Hello and welcome to Foreign Dispatches, the program that takes you around the world in 25 minutes. I'm Layo Adegoke, standing in for your regular host, Teniola Shubawale. On the program this week, the international community continues calls for calm and de-escalation in Israel and Palestine, seeking more protection for the civilians caught up in the violence. In the meantime, there's been protests all over the world as thousands of people march in solidarity with Palestine. The United Nations, the United States, UK and European countries are calling for more protection for the civilians caught up in the intense violence between Israel and Palestinian militants. Now, this comes as the conflict is now in its second week with little sign of a ceasefire despite many calls for an end. More than 200 people are now known to have died, including 59 children in Gaza and under 20 persons, including 2 children, in Israel.
There is mounting international concern over the violence, with world leaders and humanitarian organizations urging for measures to be taken to avoid residents being hurt, killed, or having their lives upended by the destruction. The UN, US, and UK have called for more protection for the civilians caught in the intense violence between Israel and Palestinian militants. In the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he wants to see an urgent de-escalation of violence in Israel.
I think that what everybody wants to see is urgent de-escalation. And that's what Dom Raab has been saying to his counterparts, both in Israel and in the Palestinian Authority.
Have you seen that intelligence has...
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken urged both sides to protect civilians, especially children, while reiterating that Israel as a democracy has an extra burden to do so.
Israel has a special responsibility to protect civilians in the course of its self-defense, and that most certainly includes journalists.
With no sign of an end to the worst outbreak of Israeli-Palestinian violence in years, on Sunday, May the 16th, the United Nations Security Council met for the 15-member council's first public meeting on the conflict. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres opened the summit saying that the hostilities in Israel and Gaza were utterly appalling, calling for an immediate end to fighting.
We meet today amid the most serious escalation in Gaza and Israel in years. The current hostilities are utterly appalling. This latest round of violence only perpetuates the cycles of death, destruction and despair, and pushes farther to the horizon any hopes of coexistence and peace. Fighting must stop. It must stop immediately.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel, through her spokesperson, called for an end to the fighting, but reaffirmed Israel's right to defend itself against the attacks. France and Egypt are also among the other nations calling for an immediate ceasefire. Meanwhile, China is calling for an action from the UN Security Council to ease the situation between Israel and Palestinians. This comes after the text, which was drawn up by China, Tunisia and Norway, calling for the cessation of violence and respect for international humanitarian law, including the protection of civilians, especially children, was blocked by the US. Meanwhile, ICC is warning that individuals involved in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict may be targeted by an international criminal court investigation that's now underway into alleged war crimes.
These are events that we're looking at very seriously. We are monitoring also very closely. And I remind that investigations have opened, and the evolution of these events could be something that we will also look at in the course of our investigations. I think this is just to alert people to be, not to escalate, to be careful, and to avoid taking actions that will result in the commission of Rome Statute crimes.
There seems to be no end in sight with this conflict, especially as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to continue launching airstrikes full force. The outbreak in violence began after weeks of rising Israeli-Palestinian tension in occupied East Jerusalem that culminated in clashes at a holy site revered by both Muslims and Jews. Hamas, which controls Gaza, began firing rockets after warning Israel to withdraw from the site, triggering retaliatory airstrikes.
Thousands of people took to the streets of cities across the world to show their support for Palestinians as airstrikes pounded Gaza and rocket attacks hit Israel in the second week of fighting. Palestinians across the world marked the Nakba or catastrophe on May 15th to mark their displacement in the 1948 war around Israel's creation.
Protesters clashed with security forces in the West Bank on Nakba Day, a day when Palestinians marked their displacement in the 1948 to 1949 war that accompanied the creation of the modern state of Israel. Waving Palestinian flags and wearing the kufiya, thousands of Israel's Arab minority turned out in Satnin on Saturday for a rally to commemorate a war lost 73 years ago. In Washington, scores of people took to the streets in Washington, D.C., carrying signs and waving flags in a show of support for Palestinians. They marched along some of the city's main streets, passing by the Capitol and gathering on the steps of the National Archives. In London, a large crowd of pro-Palestinian demonstrators took to the streets following the flare-up of Israeli-Palestinian violence. Protesters waving Palestinian flags as they gathered in Marble Arch before setting off to march towards the capital's Israel's embassy. In Europe, while the demonstrations went on peacefully in Berlin, Germany, with protesters chanting as they gathered on the Hermannplatz. Things were not so subtle in Greece. Greek police fired tear gas and water cannons to disperse pro-Palestinian protesters protesting in Athens against Israeli attacks on Gaza. Hundreds of people shouting "Freedom" to Palestine and waving Palestinian flags marched to the Israeli embassy, which was cordoned off by police buses. It was the same in Paris. French police fired tear gas at protesters defying a ban on marching as they protested against Israel's attacks on Gaza, trying to disperse demonstrators gathering in groups of several hundred. Hundreds of people also took part in authorized protests in other French cities, including Lyon and Marseille, which took place peacefully. Meanwhile, in Canada, both pro-Palestine and pro-Israel demonstrators rallied in Toronto, chanting "Free, Free Palestine" and waving Palestinian flags. They gathered in downtown Toronto in a show of support for the Palestinian people. Also, a smaller group of roughly 100 pro-Israel demonstrators also gathered in the same area, and teams of police worked to keep the two groups apart. Many in the crowd called for Canada and the West to end their support for Israel. Moving to the Middle East, thousands of Jordanians, most of them of Palestinian origin, took to the streets of the capital Amman, calling on the kingdom to strap its peace deal with Israel. In Syria, hundreds of Syrians and Palestinian refugees protested in solidarity with the Palestinians in Gaza and Sheikh al-Jarrah, the East Jerusalem neighborhood where families were evicted from their homes. The protesters chanted anti-Israeli slogans while carrying both the Syrian and Palestinian flags. It's the second week of fighting. Israel has conducted some of the heaviest airstrikes since the fighting began, targeting what is said were facilities belonging to the militant group Hamas and several commanders' homes. The overnight strikes came after Palestinian militants fired a barrage of rockets into southern Israel. Israel said more than 3,000 rockets have been fired into the country. This continued exchange of rocket fire and airstrikes quickly escalated into the fiercest hostilities between the two sides since the 40 war in 2014.
Let's move away from the Israel-Gaza conflict. In March, United States President Joe Biden introduced his $2 trillion plan to rebuild infrastructure and reshape the economy. The administration plans to invest in rural communities and communities impacted by the market-based transition to clean energy. President Biden's plan is making a particular case for investments that are resilient and will build adaptive infrastructure. Our correspondent Ayola Kasim in this next report takes a look at how this will help disadvantaged communities in America.
This freeway, right, that destroyed our community and is still killing people today.
Crosstown Freeway in Stockton, California was constructed in the 1970s, displacing what was once the largest population of Filipinos outside of the Philippines. Today, many residents of Little Manila suffer from different respiratory illnesses. Diagnosed with asthma at 8, Carlin Francisco grew up thinking everyone had it.
I grew up in school with everyone having asthma. It was not something rare for everyone. So I was like, oh, I have it. You know, that's I'm like everyone else now.
When California began making environmental data available through an online mapping tool, Carlin and others in her Filipino immigrant community realized their chronically underinvested community, Little Manila, suffered high air pollution and groundwater contamination. It also suffered some of the state's highest poverty and unemployment rates.
With a lot of the inequities coming from the Crosstown Freeway, pollution burden, and a lot of environmental factors such as the port, a lot of industry, polluters, really creating hard breathing conditions here in South Stockton.
Places like Little Manila across the United States fall within President Biden's $2 trillion infrastructure plan that targets 40% of the benefits of climate and clean investment to disadvantaged communities.
I think we need to make sure that people understand that the investments that we're making and the strategies we're making, working with, not counter to, states and local governments, but supporting their efforts directly, is going to be a way of showing people that a shift to climate change and a shift to investing in climate resilient infrastructure is not just essential, but it's beneficial today. It will put people back to work. It will keep your kids healthy. It is a way to hand them a future that we can all be proud of.
With the news comes some hope. Hope that the mapping tool will not just tell a story about why hospital ER visits for asthma were 2.4 times more frequent in neighborhoods like Little Manila, but will also help change the trend.
And so we can find all the maps and all the data in the world, but if we don't give power and resources to the people that are being injured by this history, then we're just, we're highlighting a problem and not doing anything about it.
It is not the area in which I think we're going to fight about the investments. All we're going to do is make sure that they're bold enough and big enough to meet this moment in time. So I'm very hopeful that this is not a point of contention, but it is really just a point of continuing to invest in our country again and what we need to keep our kids healthy and our future safe.
For now, Carlin has started avoiding outdoor sports and instead practicing indoor volleyball with the expectation that someday soon the community will be clean and they can be whole again. Ayola Kasim reporting for Channels Television News.
When Foreign Dispatches returns in just a moment, we meet with a Nigerian lady, Gift Solomon, who is making a name for herself in the United Arab Emirates. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the program. Talk about humanitarian service. The Nigerian community in South Africa literally walked the talk of the Ubuntu phenomenon when they came together to change the world for an unemployed South African woman and her 5 children. Channels Television travels to the Limpopo province for the unveiling of what exactly was done.
Up the hills of Khamairura in Venderland, in South Africa's Limpopo province, lives a family of 6. Meet 43-year-old Musundwa Munyadziwa Leti, an unemployed mother of 5. They used to live here in this tiny shack. And now they live here.
Beautiful.
Musundwa's story made the local newspaper mid-2020, and that got the attention of Nigerian businessman Olorunfemi Adeleke. He works in the construction sector. He made a promise to the family. A few months later, a 3-bedroom apartment was standing close by.
The fact that 6 people would sleep in such a small shack is the motivation for us to do something. Really, I mean, you've seen the children of the Musunda family. Imagine the 2 adults sleeping on the floor and 3 young kids with the mother sleeping on that small bed. I think it's enough motivation for us to be able to do something for them.
Mr. Adeleke didn't work alone. The Nigerian Union South Africa, as well as other donors within and outside the country, made this house a home for a sometimes emotional Musundwa as she toured the house with her children. It's a far cry from where they're coming from.
I'm very glad and happy to call this my house compared to the old place we were in.
A representative of the Venda royal family, Madam Thelma Musoriwa Matumba, prayed for the Nigerian community and appealed to South Africans to embrace fellow Africans because there is a lot of good that can come out of it, like this gesture. Advocate Tiny Sibuku also played a vital role in the whole project.
As a South African myself, I'm embarrassed that today we see a Nigerian man do such a wonderful house. A great gesture really for a family he's never known. To me it says xenophobia is just stupidity really. One of the princesses spoke and says, I'm sure it's high time that we see each other as brother and sister instead of seeing Nigerians and other foreigners, other Africans in the diaspora as people who are here to steal our jobs and probably steal our wives and other resources.
We are very happy that as Africans we can be able to come together, and it's part of the social cohesion that has been preached by the political leaders and also by the Nigerian Union to say that we are all one Africa. And so the one Africanness is shown today to say that it doesn't really mean that there are no poor Nigerians, but this is our sister that we need to assist.
So as reality sinks in for the Musundwa family, there's also the aspect of what next from here.
Remember that from there, from the house which she used to have, there was not even scrubbing the floor because the floor is exactly like this ground. So this woman needs to be coached from, if you scrub your floor, this is how you do it. She never used to have a bathroom. She never used to have a fridge or a microwave or an electric stove. So that's the lesson that we need to teach her. We need to teach her how to clean the house and look after the children and encourage children to read, encourage her to find a job so that this house becomes a home. Otherwise, it will be vandalized. People will come in here and take for themselves whatever it is they need. So the training actually begins today.
For starters, plans are already in place to get Musundwa a job at a local school close by, as there will still be bills to be paid. But for now, she says she's very grateful to God and those who have given her a warm home to be in with her children. In her words, I never thought in my wildest dreams I would ever own a house. From Hamairura, Limpopo, South Africa, Betty Dibia for Foreign Dispatches.
And finally, on the program, let's go meet our Dubai correspondent, Mayowa Adegoke, who tells us the story of an Edo State-born lady, Gift Solomon, who is making a name for herself in the United Arab Emirates as she becomes the first female delivery rider in the nation's history. Gift has turned her lemons to lemonade as she takes her place of honor, breaking a stereotype in the male-dominated industry.
Nigerian Gift Solomon is the UAE's only female delivery rider.
There are some certain things that I think that's tagged that ladies cannot do. But then that doesn't mean the law doesn't allow people to do it. It's just because ladies are not coming out to do the stuffs.
The 27-year-old who hails from Ologbo, Edo State, works at Dubai's Freedom Pizza, where she serves as an assistant manager, but jumped at the chance of going into the delivery business when the opportunity presented itself.
When I sat down, I was thinking, Gift, what's wrong with you? Can you really pull this off? And then I started thinking, so many reasons started coming to my head, like, you've come this far, you left home without thinking too much, how you're going to survive somewhere else. So being this person, being a rider, wouldn't really be much of a difference. And I know as a person, as an individual, I grew up with a strong mother. And I know myself, like, I can do stuff, so I shouldn't be limited because I'm a female. I shouldn't be limited because of my gender, because I just feel like what a guy can do, a lady can do it as well, especially in this industry.
However, beyond this boldness, hers is a story of success against all odds. At just 22, she had to drop out of National Open University due to financial constraints. With her higher education, she moved to Dubai in search of a better life. But like many unfortunate individuals, she also fell victim to fake employment agents.
So when I came, I was in Dubai for about 6 months. There was no job. Trust me, those 6 months was like, should I say, the worst months of my life, because I really literally have to really struggle considering the cost of living. It's a bit on the high side. So I practically struggled asking money from friends. I couldn't ask my parents because I told them I already have a job. And I kept lying to them, telling them, okay, which I'm not really proud of, but then I had to because they'll be really worried and probably will tell me to come back home, and I wasn't really ready to give up.
Her determination paid off. From working as a phone operator in 2016, Gift rose to the position of assistant manager just last year when ambition took this latest turn. She now takes pride in contributing to a new narrative within the UAE's food delivery industry.
There are some people that think it's not accurate for me to be a rider. There are some people that think, some people feel, it's all about tips. Or some people feel, I read some comments which is really not so cool. Some like, why are they not giving them a better job? Like, why are they not giving her a better job? And then I couldn't go on and reply like, hello, I'm actually working as an assistant manager and currently going for a place of a store manager, which is a huge, I've worked myself this far, like I'm where I am right now. And me being a rider is not something that I was forced into. It's me, what I want to do. I know I can do it and I'm doing it, and I want to set an example for people. I might be a rider, there are people that are changing. Ladies out there are changing the world, they are doing different things. History is being made.
She hopes her story can serve as inspiration to other Nigerian youth to always embrace hard work regardless of their circumstances.
As a community, and knowing the news that we have about Nigerians and Africans in general here, it's so good to see this sort of changes.
Gift's greatest wish is now to see more women taking on daring opportunities as she herself continues to effortlessly break down gender stereotypes one delivery at a time. From Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, Mayowa Adegoke For Foreign Dispatches.
Well, this is where we say goodbye till next time. Remember, our top stories are never far away. You can catch them on channelstv.com. Thank you so much for watching the program. I'm Layo Adegoke. Stay safe.